My name's Alison Bull. I'm not far away, I'm from Chesterfield, not originally born there though. My mother came from this area and I'm here because my grandfather and her two brothers were killed in the Markham pit disaster in 1938. My grandfather actually sunk the pit. He was a sinker and he travelled around the country, so they lived in lots of different places, sinking pits. The boys they were quite young when they were killed as well. My uncle Leslie was 23, my uncle Herbert 27, and my grandfather only 48. They lived up the road in Duckmanton, which is just close to here. Strangely, I worked at the Mine Service Centre, which was known as Ducky Workshops, which is just over the road. And I know all about it, even though obviously it was a long time ago and I wasn't born. It happened, my mum was 18. They went down the pit. On the last shift, half an hour before the end of the shift, there was an explosion. And just before, my grandma said some birds flew against the window and hit it repeatedly. And she said, "Oh dear, that's a bad sign." So she had a bit of a premonition. And then they waited and waited, then soon the news spread. And my mum came down, running down the hill to have a look, convinced that nothing would have happened to her family, until later on somebody said, "So sorry about your family, Renee," and obviously she was devastated. Well, my uncle Herbert, who was say 27, he was getting married, and he would have been married 2 weeks after that. So his fiancée was devastated as well. The other one had just got engaged. We don't know the name of the lady either, my mum couldn't remember. I think they were born various places, Settle, Barnsley. My grandmother was from up in Durham or Sunderland. They were all Geordies, her family. I'm not quite sure about how they met. It's a bit, I've been doing a lot of family research and can't find it out properly. But she was a bit older than my granddad, and he was doing some work on a house for a relative. The man died and he was left the house, but he had to find a wife, and my grandma was working there. So he said, "Shall we get married, Rosie?" And they got married. My mum was just 18, and they were so devastated that she decided we were going to move away as far as possible. So within a week she'd arranged for all the furniture to be packed, find somewhere for them to live in Chesterfield, and after the funeral they were gone. But at the funeral, my mum said all she can remember is screaming, and it was her. And there were that many people there that the service had to be held outside. And it was a grave at Duckmanton Church. There were 13 buried in it, and they were all buried together in this mass grave. But obviously it was devastating. My mum never left my grandmother in her whole life, and she died living with her as well at the age of about 68, I think she was. But she always stayed with her, and they were very close, obviously, and I don't know actually how they got over it. But Grandma was given compensation. I've got the paperwork for it, which I've given to be copied by the society, and I think she was given £300 for my granddad and £150 for each son, which was probably in 1938 a massive amount. And that was paid out in, I think, July or something like that, and the disaster was in May. And in September my grandma secured a mortgage, which was unheard of then for a woman, and bought a house in 104 Saltergate, Chesterfield. And she had a B&B and kept herself busy. She said she was that busy normally with having men folk coming from the pit, washing, cooking, baking, because of those days they came home dirty and washed. So she needed to fill the house full of people and keep busy. And she kept busy all her life. And she had a B&B then at Skegness for 20 years, till she got quite ill and just quietened life down a little bit. But they all stayed together. I think it devastated it. It was 79 people killed, still some injured. And it was a pit village. I think it was purpose built for the pit. And it just devastated the whole community. And obviously there aren't many people left now, but most people lost somebody or they were injured. I've heard tales of people who swapped shifts and escaped it. Or somebody, I think in 1937, the year before there was a disaster, her father had swapped shifts with somebody but he was killed in the 1938 disaster as well. So it's just they were a close-knit community, and that's how it was in those days. Open doors, and everybody looked after everybody's kids. And I think it shook it, and it's still remembered now. And there's still some of the families live in the village. Well, children are probably dead now, but grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And I still feel it's still part of this area's heritage, and they're very proud of it and want to keep it alive.